name, Nsah. Oh, yes. I'll just say that quickly. Kenneth has asked that if we could just record his talk. We won't record the discussion, so that he can have a record of his talk. I hope that's all okay with you. But yes, Kenneth Nsah is a PhD student at Aarhus University in literary studies or literature studies, and is just about to submit his PhD. He's also a published poet. He's a teacher, and in general, just an excellent scholar from Cameroon. He's published several books of poetry in both French and English, including in 2017, a book of poetry called Democracy, the Mal-Africanization of Democracy. Maybe I messed the title up slightly there. And he's also got a children's picture book, or several, but one that's going to be published in North America this year called What the Moon Cooks. So it's my pleasure to introduce Kenneth Nsah, or Nsah, and I will hand it over to him as he talks to us about literature, literary studies, and nature and conservation in Africa. Welcome, Kenneth.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for having invited me, and I send my greetings to everybody in attendance. And thank you for that beautiful introduction too. So I think to facilitate my talk, I will start to share my screen with you. I think I need to go to where is it, slideshow?
Slideshow, play from, yeah.
Presentation view, yeah. Oh,
I think just do play from start, I think.
Okay, play from start, okay. Let's see. Oh, okay, good. So my discussion today is going to be on literary studies and nature conservation in Africa, but specifically the case of the Congo Basin. Okay, so and here is the Congo Basin, but I'm super excited that I'm making this presentation to people mainly based in Norway, or at least that the organization that is hosting me is based in Norway, because Norway has a lot of interest in the Congo Basin. For instance, this year it was reported that Norway had paid out the sum of US $17 million to Gabon, which is one of the countries of the Congo Basin, as part of an initiative known as CAFI, the Central African Forest Initiative, which is an arrangement for carbon financing that asks for industrialized nations of the North to pay compensation to countries in the South that can be able to reduce deforestation and manage their land or land degradation in order to be able to tackle climate change. And so, yeah, and Gabon is the first country in the Congo Basin to have received such funding and to have received it too from Norway. So I'm super excited that I'm speaking here today in Norway, and I have to recognize that. So basically, the Congo Basin is the second largest tropical rainforest in the world after the Amazon, but it is not as widely known as the Amazon. And it is found in the Central African sub-region, and it cuts across 6 countries, including Cameroon, which is my home country, and then Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, Central African Republic, and then the 2 Congos, meaning Congo Brazzaville, or the Republic of Congo, which is former French colony, and then the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the DRC, which is a former Belgian colony. And the forest measures about 1.7 billion square meters, roughly 400 million hectares, and it drains an area estimated to be the size of Western Europe. And it is home to thousands of bird species and about 700 species of fish, 400 species of mammals, about 10,000 species of tropical plants, 80% of which are native or indigenous to the basin, and home to about 75 million people or more from about 150 ethnic groups, including both local and indigenous people. and who depend on it for food, for fresh water, for shelter, for medicine, and etc., etc. So, and this area is also a very hot spot when it comes to minerals, mineral extractivism in Africa, because it is rich in oil, it is rich in diamond, in cobalt, in copper, in timber, in uranium, and especially cobalt, which is used in manufacturing batteries and also phones. So a lot of the green things that we talk about up here in the north, the green transition to green energy and electrical cars is usually at the expense of some forgotten parts of the world where the war is going on almost perpetually. And so, yeah, and this is crucial. The Congo Basin, which derives its name from the river Congo that meanders across it, is crucial for carbon sequestration, because we're talking today in terms of climate change. Through photosynthesis, the forest is able to keep trap carbon dioxide, but also because recently, I think about 2 years ago, the largest tropical peatland in the world was discovered in that forest, which has the capacity to store up to about 30 billion tons of CO2. That is an approximate value of 3 years of global carbon emissions. And so now my talk is from a literary perspective, and I'm informed by eco-criticism, which is more or less the study of literary and other cultural text or artifacts in relationship with the current ecological and climate crisis. For Cheryl Glodfelty, who is one of the founding scholars in the field, she defines it as the study of the relationship between literature and the physical environment. But of course, this definition has grown today, and I'm more or less informed, especially by post-colonial eco-criticism. But now, even today, eco-criticism is not just longer about text or literary text and the environment. It goes on to, like, it is a kind of an explicit environmental, a study of explicit environmental text, according to Scott Slovic, by way of a scholarly approach, or conversely, the scrutiny of ecological implications and human-nature relations in any literary text or other form of cultural expression, be it music, be it film, and so on and so forth, even visual art and fine art, and so on and so forth. So, and within the branch known as post-colonial eco-criticism, we are more or less very attentive. It promotes attention to indigenous and post-colonial realities, which have often been erased, or which were often erased, especially in the first earlier waves of eco-criticism. And then, although we have to think planetary when it comes to issues of climate change, but at the same time, we also have to think local in order not to homogenize and erase the histories and the realities of especially people who have already been marginalized in the past through processes like colonization, and even today, even neocolonialism and the hegemonies that we build around some kinds of knowledge systems. So post-colonial eco-criticism calls for the recognition of difference in the same breath as interconnection. So it asks us to strike a balance between the notion of difference and the notion of interconnection. And we see that it also permits us to be able to pursue environmental justice, social justice, to be able to discuss issues, a wide range of issues, because issues like species extinction, global warming, climate change, unequal access to resources and services, the acidification of the oceans or the melting of the ice, and the Anthropocene, the geological or the geopolitical tensions between North and South, and so on and so forth. So it is a very eclectic theoretical framework that also helps us to engage with issues as complex as the climate and ecological crisis of today. And so I am arguing that in the Congo Basin, literature can do, or at least help us, or I claim that literature can be able to do a number of things. Some of them being that literature creates environmental awareness, and is also an avenue for expressing activism. And it can be either textual activism or what we call textual militancy, or even the representation of real day activism. And this is particularly evident in the drama text that I deal with, because my thesis deals with a text both from drama, from fiction, novels, and also some poetry. Yeah, so literature, especially eco-drama, can be used as a tool for raising environmental awareness. Example, the dangers of deforestation, the importance of planting trees and conservation, etc., etc. And we can take the examples of two plays here, Le Cri de la Forêt by Henri Njombo and OSEH Lunchtime, or The Last Hope by Ekpe Inya. And here you can see a picture. This here, the person I'm pointing to here is OSEH Lunchtime. He is also a stage director, and he went to a school in Brazzaville, Congo, around Brazzaville, Congo, in the outskirts, where he staged this play, and he was able to plant trees with the students in the school thereafter. And so this is a good example of the kind of linkage between textual activism and also real day activism in favor of nature protection. And then in terms of activism, again, I take writers like Henri Njombo, who is a retired politician, a retired minister in the Congo Brazzaville. Kouanye, who is a stage director and environmental playwright, and stage director Ekpe Inyang, who works for the WWF, but also writes a lot of plays on environmental issues and also poetry. And then people like Nadia Origo, who has written a novel in this direction, or Asito Ndinga. I argue that they perform environmental advocacy and activism through their text. And meanwhile, texts like Njombo's plays, Le Bénévole, and also Nadia Origo's novel, Le Voyage d'Oro, they chronicle the experiences of young eco-activists, and therefore they forecast or they foreshadow today's youth climate activism. Like we all know today about the activism that is spearheaded by young people like Greta Thunberg or Vanessa Nakate and the rest around the world when they march on Fridays for the Future. And I argue that this text, in a way, foresaw the coming of such a movement at the same time as they stimulated even the movement or activism among young people by putting young people in the place at the center of environmental and climate concerns. And I also I also argue that literature points to us or helps us shine a light on human-nature entanglement. When we take a play like Watana Life, that's in Cameroon Pidgin English, it means water is life, by Ekpe Inyang, is a play that foregrounds human-nature interconnections and interdependence by depicting a rural community that is called Mang, where people are polluting a river that provides water and fish for them. And it deploys a powerful metaphor, the metaphor of vomiting, to signal not only ill health or human ill health, but also to indicate that the nature can vomit us out if we trespass planetary boundaries. And so it sheds light on the agency of nature through slow violence and other forms of violence, like what I've called simultaneous violence, and exposes violations of both the rights of humans and the rights of nature. And it highlights how governmental absence affects both human and ecological health, because in the play there is no government authority or institution to provide water for the people who need water. So they turn to fetch water from a stream that at the same time they are polluting. And then we take a novel like The Buffalo Rider by Athanasius Nsah. It narrates the extinction of animal species through a strange encounter between a hunter or a former hunter and a buffalo, and they are riding. And in the process of him riding this buffalo, they are co-becoming. They are like the man is becoming the buffalo and the buffalo is becoming the man. Although even at the end of the novel, we are disappointed that the man, for his ego, because of fame, kills the buffalo. At least the lesson that we try to learn all through up to that point is that there is some reciprocity, that kinship goes beyond humans to more than humans. And so this novel pushes boundaries of what can be considered a companion or a domestic animal, and even suggests, although somehow problematically, that domestication could also be a strategy used in the preservation of species that are going extinct. Oh, I think I'll skip something. Yeah, and then this literature also helps in spotlighting local and indigenous knowledges. For example, you can see here, this is palm wine, and this is a very popular drink in Central and West Africa. And in Le Cri de la Forêt, the play valorizes this play, although in a kind of problematic manner, because it is an indigenous drink, and it can be an eco-friendly alternative to plastic polluting drinks like Coca-Cola or even Pepsi and so on and so forth. And then Le Silence de la Forêt, a novel by Etienne Goyemide, who comes from the Central African Republic, depicts indigenous Babinga people in their forests, where they blend with the forest, where they display immemorial wisdom in managing, in harvesting from, and in relating to nature. And they lead a life not of GDP, but a life of caring and sharing. And so in a novel like Le Marchand du Développement Durable, a novel by Asitu Ndinga, it stages a conflict between indigenous pygmies whose economic system is not based on possession and ownership or even measurable GDP. Just like the Babinga pygmies. The pygmies in this novel too are people who have a worldview, an economic worldview that consists of nobody owning anything and everybody owning everything. And you can only take the commons. It's actually about the commons and sharing those commons. And so now they clash with certain experts from the West because they have come to impose a certain idea of sustainable development, which is actually avowedly, as they do it, a kind of co-option of the people into neoliberal capitalism. And then finally, in Congo Inc., Le Testament de Bismarck, this is one of the most interesting novels that I've read. It's a novel that narrates the perpetual war in the Congo that is orchestrated by outside forces in order to get resources, especially those that we use in manufacturing the electric cars that we press up north. But also this is going on against a background of mounting climate change and species going extinct and indigenous people not being able to get the insects on which they have been feeding, and also with different players into the neo-colonial quest for resources, including China. Not only the European, the former colonial masters and the US, but also China. And yeah, so, and then in this novel, we find an indigenous person, an indigenous man known as Uncle Lomama, who is able to summon rain in different parts of the forest, depending on the needs of the vegetation. So if the forest is in dire need of rain at some point, he is able to bring rain to that place. And so those are important alternatives to the kinds of knowledge that have come to dominate the world stage today. Oops. And then literature is also able to help us question harmful or questionable policies and practices within conservation or within nature conservation, within environmental management or mitigation and climate change mitigation. For example, some novels like the last, texts like The Last Hope, which is a play by Ekpe Inyang, and novels like Le Marchand du Développement Durable, they expose a myth that is undergirding, that is underpinning conservation in Africa today, the myth of thinking that Africa has the last Eden of the earth that needs to be protected, that Africa has some pristine nature where there has never been any human being living there. And this has its origins in racist colonial mentalities, which are not disconnected from the the Yellowstone National Park in the US and the way that it was created and the kind of violence that the indigenous people were subjected to. And so this too is even very prominent today in the Congo Basin, because it has come to support a kind of model of conservation known as fortress conservation, where nature reserves are a no-go zone for people who until then were living there, who have lived there for thousands of years sustainably, then they are just suddenly asked to quit, and then they are disconnected from there, both physically but also spiritually displaced from the lands that are theirs, and where they even sometimes have better expertise in terms of managing those areas. So yeah, and it also challenges, literature also helps us to challenge tendencies such as the tendency to globalize, or the globalization of neo-capitalism, or commodifying nature in order to conserve it. Can't we conserve nature just because of the intrinsic value of nature? Must we give an economic value to nature before we can conserve it? So these are the kind of questions that literature also helps us to ask about conservation in the Congo Basin. So yeah, to conclude, I think that literature in the Congo Basin and by extension elsewhere can help us to raise ecological awareness, and thus the need to mitigate climate change and preserve biodiversity. It can remind humanity of our entangled relationships with nature, thus decentering the human. And literature can also help us to valorize local and indigenous knowledge systems, thus dismantling epistemological hegemonies, or even helping us to deal with epistemicide. And literature can question harmful practices in nature conservation while pursuing both social and ecological justice, justice for the modern human world and justice for the vulnerable people that are concerned in those localities. And finally, it can help us to reformulate the models and the premises employed in nature conservation and climate action. So thank you.